Good evening and welcome to A Slice of Life. Tonight's topic is something called pesticide reform. We have with us Louise Washer. She's a board member of the Pollinator Pathway, and she's here tonight to talk to us about pesticide reform. Louise Washer, welcome to A Slice of Life.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. Always happy to talk about pesticide reform. It's not the happiest topic, but we have a lot of opportunity to make it a better story in Connecticut.
Well, it's definitely not cocktail party conversation.
Not cocktail party. Well, it can be. You haven't
It
gone
could
to a
be.
cocktail party with me.
It could be. So before we get started on pesticides, let's learn about your educational background, how you got from high school to here.
Wow, all the way back to that.
Well,
I grew up in South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
Yep, but I went to college in Massachusetts and lived in New York City for a long time, and I was a journalist. I was in journalism.
Oh.
Then I moved to Connecticut when my kids were little, and got involved through their school in being a science mom and doing river walks. We did something called River Study, and I realized, oh, there's this Norwalk River, or there are these native plants. Like the landscape of Connecticut, it was all new to me.
Yeah.
And I got really interested and ended up joining the Norwalk River Watershed Association.
Oh, wow.
So that's all the area in southwest Connecticut that drains into that one river. So it's 7 towns.
Wow.
And I am still doing that. I am the president of the Norwalk River Watershed Association. And out of that, with that hat on, I helped start the Pollinator Pathway. So there were a bunch of organizations. And from those people, I started to, I have been worried about pesticides in our rivers and that part of the water quality challenges that we have for a long time. And then I started working with the plant people and looking at the declines in insects, declines in bees and butterflies and birds, and the connection all of those things have to water and to how we're managing our own backyards and what we're planting. And that is my passion now. I still have pesticides and water at my core of what I work on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's almost like, where do you begin in these pesticide issues? Let's go to the first slide, shall we? Okay, so here, this is an excerpt from one of the presentations that you make, I understand. And could you just talk about this a little bit?
Well, for 10 years I've been trying to talk to people about water quality and what we're doing to our rivers. And when I started working with the Pollinator Pathway, suddenly we had the butterfly as something to talk about. And that was just a much better door opener, because people are understanding that there are declines in pollinators. And you can say to people, do you want more butterflies in your yard? And nobody's going to say no. So that is a good door opener. But there's also just an anxiety more. I think people aren't as focused on water quality, every day as they are what they're seeing. They're seeing fewer bugs hit their windshield. They're seeing, not as many bees and butterflies in their yards. And the reasons for that are multiple, but one of them is loss and fragmentation of habitat. You can see like the picture of suburbia over there where the landscape is just chopped up. So insects and birds can't move across the landscape because we have just covered it with lawn, a lot of it with lawn, which doesn't provide any food habitat.
The lawn is really a sterile environment for bugs and butterflies and stuff.
It's not supporting, it's also not helping to clean water runoff before it gets to the rivers. So lack of native plants. So instead of all this monoculture of European grasses, putting back the plants that the insects and birds evolved with. So the ones that they use for the pollen that they need, the ones that they nest in, the ones, a great story is the dogwood, our native dogwood, blooms at the same time that the blue azure butterfly comes out. So there are a lot of specialist relationships between plants and insects and birds. So that's one of the things climate change is throwing off, because it's monkeying with like when a plant blooms and when an insect emerges. So that's another threat. Light pollution is a problem for moths and fireflies and things at night. And then the big one that I'm focused on pesticides and lawn chemicals, and really just the overuse of those without understanding what they are, what they're doing to human health, water quality, biodiversity, all that.
As a footnote, I remember going on a family trip at night in the car, and the windscreen was just covered with bugs. You could hear them splattering, and that's not true now. You don't get thousands of bugs hitting your windshield.
You don't, and I feel like for the kids growing up today, they won't even miss that. They're not going to recognize we don't have that anymore because in their experience they haven't had it.
Yeah.
But I do think people are ready to do something about it. That's the energy that I feel through working with the pollinator pathway.
I think you're right. I believe that the popularity of the pollinator program is at least hinting to some people that maybe we need to do something different.
And I think for people that already have the anxiety, it's saying here's something you can do in your own yard that's fairly simple and probably going to save you money.
Yeah.
So.
Well, before we go to the next slide, one thing I like to reference when we're talking about pesticides and microenvironments and stuff is that I, against my wife's will, I have snakes in my garden. They're just little garter snakes. They're harmless, but they are there. I don't see them too often, but I know they're there. And I just take that as evidence that, I'm doing good with my pesticide chemical-free garden.
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
And,
one of the problems we have in Connecticut we have a huge problem with ticks, obviously, and Lyme disease. And one of the reasons that we have such a problem is that we have gotten rid of sort of the natural balances in a lot of our backyard scenario. We have the deer, the white-footed mouse, and the tick. We've gotten rid of the opossum that eats, thousands of ticks a minute or whatever.
Too often they wind up on the road.
But I think when you see a diverse range of species in your yard, you're doing something right. You have nesting birds and snakes and frogs, you're doing the right thing.
Let's go to the next. Oh, here we go. Excellent. Very
and good segue for the birds.
This is very interesting because I know from my winter feeding program, I have chickadees in my backyard. Mm-hmm. So it's curious to me how many, I guess, caterpillars a chickadee needs to feed her brood.
Yeah, the very well-known naturalist and scientist from the University of Delaware, Doug Ptolemy, did a study, had his grad student out there counting, and
that's definitely grad student work.
It's grad student work, and it's 6,000 to 9,000.
Wow.
So that really...
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. It helps you recognize how everything is connected. The insects are the bottom of the food chain.
Right.
We all need the insects.
It's the foundation.
It's the foundation for everything. So just to look at birds, you can see, and this is something, I certainly didn't know how important caterpillars are.
Yeah.
So your moths, so turn your lights out at night, so those moths, so they can feed the baby birds.
Right. So my curiosity is, I live in a fairly suburban area. I do have about a maybe 2-acre plot of undeveloped forest in my backyard. And so I would have to think the chickadees and most songbirds are getting most of their caterpillars from there. And then they show up around the bird feeders and throughout the neighborhood.
Yeah, and I could talk for a whole hour about which trees, for people who want to understand better how they can support birds and different pollinators, there's a lot of information on the website pollinator-pathway.org about what to plant and just to recognize what you already have. Like oak trees are the number one tree in terms of the number of moths and butterflies that they support. So it's over 400. It's like 436 species or something. So a white oak is the very top. So if you have an oak tree in your yard, you have like a keystone tree. It's going to support so many. So the chickadees just need to find a few trees like that. Our native cherries, willows, the oaks, birches. So just making sure you have a few of those native canopy trees that are so supportive is really all you have to do to be on the pollinator pathway. Is just don't use the pesticides and have a couple of trees like that. You're done.
Okay, next one, please. Oh, here we go. So what exactly is a pesticide?
So I didn't realize this until I really started working on this, that pesticide is just an umbrella term for all of these different poisons that we use, like insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticides, anything really that's designed to kill something that we don't want.
Right.
Whether it's, a dandelion or ticks or whatever. And they are just gigantically used. I mean, 88 million households use them. I mean, it's just and herbicides is staggering. And without thinking and assuming that, if they're out there for sale, they must be safe for people and
well,
the environment.
yeah. I think that's a slide coming up.
Is that a slide coming up? Okay.
If it's for sale, well, hey, it must be okay.
Yeah, and we all want to think that. And then there are a few problems with that not being the case.
I think there's also problems with the inactive ingredients as well as the active ingredients.
Very much so. That's definitely true of Roundup too. In fact, the inactive ingredients were found to exacerbate the problems with glyphosate, which is the active ingredient. And some of those inactive ingredients just have their own negative reactions, and those aren't tested for. So in the test,
that's right. Right.
So they don't test for inactive ingredients. They don't test for combinations, and most of the testing is done by the industry itself. So a lot of problems with that.
Okay. Well, we're doing what we can. Next.
Here we go.
Oh, here's what we
were just talking about.
Here we go.
So this is what I'm saying. Done by the manufacturers, only on the active ingredient. The tests are done on limited population. They're not tested, obviously, on children or people with existing health issues.
Right.
There's no testing of combinations of pesticides. So if you use a fungicide and then you put down some weed killer, what's happening there, it's just not tested for. We also have, in this country, we allow the use of several pesticides that are banned in other countries. One of which is the neonicotinoids that I want to talk about.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I want to get to.
Well, just as a side note, I don't know anybody in my circle of friends who would know what gamma cyhalothrin is, or what it does. Or
well, I mean, this is why I have this picture of the label, because I want to empower people to go on the journey that I've gone on, which is just to recognize that you can look at the label and you can just Google those things.
Yeah.
I mean, you can also go to Beyond Pesticides or Pesticide Action Network. There are several that I recommend using. Those two are very good.
Right.
Xerces Society, and they will have information on all of these. You can also just Google it, and then you can look. I mean, you'll see the message from the manufacturer that probably says everything's fine as long as you use it this way and this way, which is important to know.
It's a chemical warm embrace.
Yeah, it's a chemical warm embrace. But if you do look at like Xerces Society, which is a
I've been to that website.
The Xerces.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So it'll go into the effects that these specific chemicals have on pollinators or invertebrates or human health. So that I think the first step for people is to recognize you have a responsibility to know what you're putting down in your yard or what your town is putting down in the parks, and to just do a quick Google and make an informed decision about do I or do I not want to use this.
Yeah.
Because just trusting, they said put this down, I'm putting this down, is kind of just not fully responsible at this point when we're seeing the
trusting the
losses.
mega million manufacturer is probably a little naive.
Yeah. Yep.
And I
trusting
don't
the people that are making
anybody,
money off of it. Yeah.
We're talking about the future of our planet, so I think we can push the limit there.
Yeah.
So if you don't understand what the word is or the chemical is, Google it.
Yeah.
Google has the answer.
Google has the answer.
All right, next.
So we are.
What is this now?
Yeah.
Oh,
so neonicotinoids. Yeah.
Did I say that right?
Yeah. I mean, we just neonics is what we call them because it's too
we
hard
all
to
know
say.
what we're talking about.
Yeah, but they're the most widely used insecticides in the world. They've only been around since the 1990s, and they are very much linked to the really sharp declines that we see in pollinator numbers. Bees are especially susceptible, and the loss of 30 million birds in the last 50 years, also linked to this time frame of the use of this. The problem with neonics is that they are just so good at killing insects. They are so powerful. 1 square foot of lawn where neonics are used, they're often used to kill grubs in turf grass.
Right.
1 square foot has enough poison used at EPA approved levels to kill 1 million bees. So they're known as the new DDT.
Louise, that is a very scary number.
It's very scary. They are 7,000 times more toxic than DDT was. So we've just gotten so good at creating these killer chemicals that.
Now, are these neonic pesticides easily available? You got a special order of them? Where do we get them from?
Very good question. They are in most states. You can just buy them over the counter in Lowe's. Connecticut is one of the states that made them. In 2016, we made them restricted use, so you have to be a certified pesticide applicator to use them. And there are a handful of states that have made neonics restricted use. Some have banned their use for non-agricultural uses and in agriculture. They're banned in Europe and in parts of Canada. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's a good.
Well,
but
we
you
don't
can
want
still
to pick
order
on
them.
any one particular big box store.
No.
We'll just say any big box store.
Okay, any big box store. Yeah, I shouldn't have.
Should have them.
Well, in Connecticut, a big box store should not have them because we made them restricted use. So you have to be a certified applicator and you can't just buy them over the counter. You can still order them online.
That's a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction. And in Connecticut, we are about to take another more important step, which I think we're going to talk about, which is I think we're going to pass a bill. We're working for the past 3 years on passing a bill to further restrict neonicotinoids.
Next.
Do we have that on the next slide?
This one.
Well, this is just, I'm glad I have to have all these words up here so I can remember everything. I may have already said some of these things, but neonics, they work the way nicotine works. So that's why they're called neonics, through the central nervous system. They are particularly deadly to bees, as we talked about, and they're connected to the loss of 3 billion birds. The EPA was actually sued by the Center for Biological Diversity because they charged that the EPA was allowing the use of neonics without testing their effects on listed and endangered species. And so they were in violation of the Endangered Species Act. So the EPA had to look into this, and they found that these pesticides pose threat to over 200 threatened and endangered species. So it's really our most vulnerable populations are being really hit by this.
Now, and when a certified applicator, would that be Joe Landscaper?
Yes.
Or could it be, or somebody,
yeah,
so it's the neighborhood landscaper guy.
Exactly. So if you hire somebody to do your lawn, in all likelihood, somebody on that team will be a licensed applicator. And so they can use all of the tougher pesticides that that are restricted use.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
That's why you need to read the label. You need to read the label on anything you buy, but you need to ask if you hire somebody, or if you see they're spraying in your town, you need to say, what are you using, and look at those labels, because that's really the scary stuff.
Next. So
now we're on to water, which for all pesticides and all contaminants, really, they end up in our water. Neonics are very water soluble. They're systemic pesticides, so they are created to dissolve in water, and so the plant can take it up into itself. So the whole plant becomes toxic. Yeah, the pollen, the dew on the leaves, leaves themselves, the fruit. So if you're eating fruit that has been sprayed with or grown from the coated seeds, you can't wash it off. So it's getting into the food supply, and it's in our water supply. We know in Connecticut, the U.S. Geological Survey has done testing of all these different chemicals. I like this orange block looking, not very fancy looking chart there. But what it tells you is that of 218 pesticides tested by the U.S. government for the Norwalk River, which is one of the rivers that they test every month for the past 25 years, 30 ended up in the river, and of those, 1 ended up at levels beyond the threshold that the EPA sets for aquatic life.
Right.
So all the little bugs,
Amphibian.
living, the things that fly fishermen fish for,
Right.
those things are at this poison. These poisons are in the river at levels that
Caddisfly, mayfly, all that.
particularly, mayfly is particularly vulnerable to neonics.
Next.
So yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So you can just see that in 2016, so Connecticut tests 2 rivers, the Connecticut River and the Norwalk River, every month. And in 2016, they looked at 16 rivers across the state. And in all of those studies, we are seeing neonics in our rivers. So we have that data.
Next. Well, this is a happy story.
I know. Though I know and this is not going to cheer you up either. This one. A lot of the use of neonics in Connecticut is on lawns and golf courses. We have a little bit more acreage that is lawn than we do that is agriculture. So it's a really important thing to think about how we're treating our backyards,
right.
and the land, the lawn, the golf courses and things. So if we could just not use neonics for just those aesthetic purposes, we could get rid of probably more than half of the neonics in Connecticut. So that should be a no-brainer. Like, is a green lawn, free of grubs worth what we're doing to the rivers? And I mean, that is a question that the Agricultural Experiment Station in Connecticut has said that they're not even really very good at killing grubs. So there are studies showing they're not even useful for that. So it's kind of a waste what we're doing. And then the other side of the problem are the neonic coated seeds. So these are corn, wheat, soybean. We don't have a lot of wheat and soybean in Connecticut, but our dairy farms do grow a lot of corn in Connecticut. So the idea here is that when you plant the seed, it's already got the pesticide coated on the outside of it. So we know from the industry itself, when they did studies of how much of that pesticide is going up into the plant and how much is going off into the environment, that 5%, it's like between 2 and 5%, is going up into the plant. So 95% of that coating is going to be moving through the soil, going up into non-target plants, and ending up in our waters.
Let's talk about rodenticide. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah. So, so anyway, the seeds are a whole other part of what we want to do in Connecticut, which is to ban the use on lawns and gardens, and also to get at the problem of these coated seeds, which are kind of a wasteful use. And then rodenticides there's a bill also for the past 3 years, at least, in Connecticut, to ban one of the uses or to further restrict a specific rodenticide, which is called a second-generation anticoagulant rodenticide. And I'm not at all an expert on this, but I've been going around the state with the people who are, because we've been trying to address both these issues.
Right.
And those are the things, like if you put them out to kill a mouse and a mouse eats it, and then a hawk eats the mouse, it has that second generation, can kill the hawk.
Oh, that's what the second generation
is.
is.
So it will kill the second generation predator.
So to kill the hawk, the fox.
Anything that eats the poisoned mouse.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure California has banned them, and other states are acting, because it's just the testimony from the people that are working in these bird rehab places is heartbreaking.
I bet.
Eagles. I mean, it's the big predator birds a lot of times that they see.
Beautiful creatures.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's what is the cost here? Like, what we need to do is, if there are places where there's lots of garbage, like clean that up, address the rodent issue. And there are lots of other rodenticides to use. It's not that that's the only one. This is just the one that is killing the birds and the foxes, as you said, and all other wildlife.
Now, what do we want what can the people viewing this at home, what can they do to help pesticide reform?
They can do all the things in their own backyard that we talked about, like reducing your lawn sites. Just don't use pesticides in your yard, or if you do, be really careful to know what you're using. Buy organic food is an important thing that you can do. But the main thing for the rodenticides and the neonicotinoids this year, or coming up in 2025, is call your state representative and ask them, your state assembly member, your state senator, and say, you know, I've been hearing about the issues in Connecticut with having neonicotinoid pesticides in our water and with the death of these birds from rodenticides, and I really want to see a bill move forward in the state and pass this year. That is what we need to do. We need for our legislators to
Public engagement.
hear from people on this
Right.
issue. Yeah, I mean, they're hearing from some of the pesticide applicators and the landscapers, you know, that we want to have these options, and you know, that's understandable. But I think we really have to weigh the costs, and our legislators just aren't hearing from like everyday people. This is an issue that I care about and we want
Right.
to do something about.
So I would say in conclusion, because we're almost out of time, and clearly I have to have you back. You were very informative, but I would say if you're interested in what we're doing in the backyard, go to Pollinator Pathway, go to the Xerces Society website, and you will find out and maybe surprise yourself just what exactly is happening in maybe not your backyard, but your neighbor's backyard, and how that's affecting you maybe.
Absolutely, and I mean, you can also do this at the town level. Like in Norwalk, where I live, we were able to pass an ordinance banning the use of pesticides on municipal property, and Stamford has done the same thing.
Right.
I think that's another way we can put pressure on Hartford, is if more and more individual municipalities take a stand.
Right. All right, well, Louise, we are sadly at the end of our time. You've been a wealth of information, and I would love to have you back.
Absolutely, anytime.
Maybe in the spring, where we can talk about such gardening things.
Sounds good, and we'll be really working to pass that bill in the spring, so I'll come back and give another cheerleading
I would love to
cry
have
for
you
that.
back. Yep.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise Washer.
Thank you for having me on.
That's it. Thank you very much.